Hello. So the other day I mentioned that in order for us to have great English grammar and understanding of English sentences, we need to be able to know what these 8 terms are on the screen. And we looked at independent clauses, we looked at simple sentences, we looked at the subject of a clause, and we looked at the verb of a clause. So we need to understand what all 8 of these terms mean. So we've done these 4 which are in red. And what we're going to do today is look at compound sentences and coordinating conjunctions. So we're going to add 2 more to our list. So after today's lesson, we will be masters of 6 of them, and there will only be 2 left to complete. Okay, but we need to remind ourselves of the stuff we've already looked at, just so we can move on more easily and more conveniently. So what is a simple sentence? Well, it has a subject and it has a verb. It never has a second clause or a conjunction. It is an independent clause, but we don't call it that if it's all by itself. We call it a simple sentence. So if we look at this sentence, it says, the glorious sunshine hit the sandy beach below. Now I need to ask myself, is that a simple sentence? And if it is, how do I know? Now, I know that a simple sentence has a subject and it has a verb. So does this sentence have a subject and does it have a verb? Well, let's find the verb. Here's the verb, hit. And what is the thing in the sentence that is doing the hitting? Well, it's the sunshine. So the sunshine is hitting the sandy beach below. So the glorious sunshine hit the sandy beach below. So we know it's got a subject, we know it's got a verb, and we know, look, it makes complete sense all by itself, and it doesn't have a second clause or a conjunction. So this is a simple sentence. Okay, so if you could pause the video, and in the next 30 seconds, can you write your own simple sentence? Remember, all it needs is a subject and a verb. It can't have another clause or a conjunction, but as long as it's got a subject and a verb and it makes sense all by itself, then you've written a simple sentence. So pause the video, have a go, and then resume the video. So what are we looking at today? So we are now looking at compound sentences and coordinating conjunctions. We've done these other 4 that are highlighted in red, and next time we'll be looking at complex sentences and subordinating conjunctions. So let's start looking at compound sentences and coordinating conjunctions. Okay, so compound sentences and coordinating conjunctions, they go hand in hand, right? So we need to be, sorry, when I say they go in hand, what I mean is you can't have a compound sentence without a coordinating conjunction. If you use a coordinating conjunction, then you've made a compound sentence. So they go together. So today we need to be able to identify compound sentences and create our own compound sentences. But what is a compound sentence? Compound sentences are made up of 2 things. Now we already know what one of those things are. Independent clauses. I went to the park the other day. So this is an independent clause because, as we know, an independent clause must have a subject, I, and it must have a verb, went. And it must make sense all by itself. So we know it's an independent clause, but we don't call it one because it's all by itself. It's not part of anything else. So it's just called a simple sentence. Now, if I add a second part to it, and we'll talk about the second part in more detail in a minute, then this independent clause or this simple sentence becomes a compound sentence. So the best way to look at this is if we look at this section of the text here, it says, I went to the park the other day. Now it says the same thing here. Now here, we would call it a simple sentence because it isn't part of another clause. But down here, we wouldn't call it a simple sentence because there's another clause joined onto it. So what we'd call that is we just call it an independent clause. This part, we would call it a coordinating clause. Now we need to understand why we would call that part a coordinating clause. So let's try to explain that. Before we do that, let's quickly recap. A simple sentence is a sentence, a simple sentence is a sentence with a subject and a verb. An independent clause is the part of the sentence that has a subject and a verb and it makes sense all by itself. A compound sentence is a sentence with an independent clause and a coordinating clause. But the only thing that we haven't really looked at yet is how we go about making coordinating clauses. So that's what we need to do now. Okay, so on the screen, on the left-hand side, we have a list of coordinating conjunctions. And the best way to remember them is by using the acronym FANBOYS. In other words, each conjunction, when they're lined up this way, if we look down the left-hand side, it spells out the word fanboys. So it's a very good way to remember all of the coordinating conjunctions. Now, it's a good idea to try to remember all of those conjunctions, but don't worry for now if you can't. Okay, so how do we make a compound sentence? Now, a compound sentence is an independent clause plus a coordinating clause. Now, let's quickly talk about these two things. We know what an independent clause is. That's the thing that's a little bit like a simple sentence. Yeah, it's got a subject and a verb and it makes sense all by itself. But we don't call it a simple sentence because it's got another section with it. And this is the coordinating clause. Now, to make a coordinating clause, all you have to do is think of a simple sentence or an independent clause, and then add one of these conjunctions, one of these coordinating conjunctions, and add to that sentence. So we're going to look at some examples. If we look at the bottom sentence, it says, the crowd shouted and jeered as he ran on the pitch, but he wasn't bothered. Now remember, a compound sentence has an independent clause followed by a coordinating clause, right? So let's see if that sentence below has those things. Now, does it have an independent clause? If we look here, is this an independent clause? The crowd shouted and jeered as he ran on the pitch. Yes, that's an independent clause because it's got a subject, which is the crowd, and it's got a verb, but it's got two verbs here, shouted and jeered. Okay, so the subject, the verbs, and that part, the red part, that makes sense all by itself. If we got rid of that blue part, it would say, the crowd shouted and jeered as he ran on the pitch. So that makes sense all by itself. So we know that that's an independent clause. However, it does have this blue bit next to it, doesn't it? It does have, let me uncover that bit. It says, but he wasn't bothered. Now, because that is attached to this independent clause, that's why we don't call it a simple sentence. We call it a compound sentence because it's an independent clause followed by a coordinating clause. Now, how do I know that this is a coordinating clause? Well, it's using the word but, which is a coordinating conjunction. If the clause begins with a coordinating conjunction, we know it's a coordinating clause. Okay, so this sentence isn't a simple sentence, it's a compound sentence, because remember, compound sentences begin with independent clauses and then have coordinating clauses. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned is when we use a coordinating conjunction like but or for and nor or yet and so, if we use any of those conjunctions, we must put a comma before it. Okay, so like you can see in this example below, there is a comma before the conjunction. Okay, now let's look at another sentence. It had been raining all day, yet he decided to go out without wearing a coat. So I'm going to leave this on the screen. Maybe you can pause the video and maybe you can try to explain to yourself or to someone close to you, what kind of sentence is it? Is it a compound sentence? And if it is, how do you know? Okay, once you've done that, do one more. The door was broken, so they had to go through the window. Can you prove that that is a compound sentence? And how do you know? Okay, so here is another compound sentence. It says, our planet spins very quickly, yet nobody falls off. So let's break this sentence down. Here, we've got our independent clause in red, haven't we? And we know it's an independent clause because if we just read that part, it satisfies the criteria for an independent clause. It has a subject, which is the planet, and the verb, which is to spin. Our planet spins very quickly. It's got a subject, it's got a verb, and it makes sense all by itself. If we got rid of the blue part, it would simply read, our planet spins very quickly. So we know that that is an independent clause. We've got the comma, which remember must come before the coordinating conjunction, the fanboy. In this case, it's yet. And then we've got the coordinating clause, yet nobody falls off. Now, this clause, remember, doesn't make sense if we read it all by itself. It does rely on that independent clause to make sense. And we've got our subject and we've got a verb, but it doesn't make sense. So it's not an independent clause, okay? And of course, it begins with that conjunction, one of the fanboys. All right, so another activity for you is on the screen, we have 3 simple sentences. We've got his pen ran out of ink, her cat escaped through the hole in the bush, and the rain hasn't stopped all day. Now, could you pause the video and can you extend each of these simple sentences so that they become compound sentences? Now, remember, the way we do this is we pick any of these coordinating conjunctions and then we use them to extend each of these sentences. Now, remember, we must put a comma before we use them. And that's pretty much it. If you put the comma and you put the conjunction, all you need to do is finish off that clause with whatever you want to write, and then you have made a compound sentence. Okay, so hopefully now you can see the difference between a simple sentence and a compound sentence. Okay, and the final task, once you have finished that last activity, on the screen, there's a question. It says, the planet Mercury has no atmosphere, so it is unable to retain the sun's heat. And the 4 questions we've got: what is the independent clause in the sentence and how do you know? What is the coordinating clause in the sentence? How do you know? Can we ever consider this sentence a simple sentence? And can we ever consider this sentence a compound sentence? So pause the video, answer those 4 questions, and then that's it. We have finished this lesson. But before you go, I'm just going to go right back to the first screen and show you something. Here we go. So you should now know what a simple sentence is, an independent clause is. You should be able to identify the verb of a clause and, of course, the subject as well. And now, hopefully, you know what a compound sentence is and what a coordinating conjunction is. If you know what those 6 things are, then you're doing very, very well. And English grammar language related questions are going to be a little bit easier for you. Now, we've got 2 more to do, which we'll do next week: complex sentences and subordinating conjunctions. They aren't that dissimilar to compound sentences. I mean, there is a major difference, but in terms of its practice, the way we form the sentences, it isn't much different. But what I will say is subordinating conjunctions are way more fun than coordinating conjunctions. So it's something to look forward to. Okay, thank you very much for watching this video, and I really, really hope it's helped. Thank you. Goodbye.